Welcome to Cinema Gulp today. This is John.
And this is Ben.
And we're going to do a quick shot review of Suicide Squad.
It's no secret that DC has limped out of the starting gate without a clear direction in sight. Their rush to join together a cinematic universe has felt generic and desperate thus far, stumbling on too much product placement and attempting to world build a much darker tone and color palette than its counterpart. Then came Suicide Squad. In my opinion, a fresher and slightly more interesting trip into the universe, a colorfully menacing popcorn thrill ride that finally manages to create a world and a group of characters that, even though are bad guys, are interesting, slightly sympathetic, and darkly funny at times. Suicide Squad may not be adding much to the mythos or the universe building of the DCCU, but on its own, it's at least a DC film that feels fun with a little bit of life, if not chocked full of obvious flaws. With as many plot holes as there are interesting characters, Suicide Squad has managed to jump a small hurdle to course correct what's come before it that has set the bar so low. John, what did you think of Suicide Squad?
Well, I agree with you that it had interesting characters. I did not enjoy it as a film so much. It just fell flat definitely from a plot standpoint. I think it was very muddled and weak. I don't know what I was expecting exactly from the plot. I thought that maybe there was going to be a bit more of a covert operation going on and a real reason to assemble this team of villains and badasses and have a real need for their skill set. That didn't seem to come through with the plot that they set up for this movie. It was very standard superhero plotting that we've seen way too many times at this point. It really is so unoriginal. These villains that you have in this film and their motives are very typical of what we've seen a lot lately, and it just dull in my opinion. Another issue I had with the film was the overuse of music. I felt like they should have gone with score more often than not in some of these scenes, and they were pumping up this pop music and rock music throughout too much of the movie. It became distracting for me, and I didn't think the song choices were all that interesting. They could have gone with some more original stuff, not just so obvious. So yeah, I thought it was, I expected more from David Ayers. I thought I was expecting a lot after Fury, which was a film I really, really enjoyed. So I think maybe it was the studio getting involved, as they seem to be doing with all these DC movies, and kind of messing this up a little bit from what maybe he had planned it to be.
Well, I agree with you on the overuse of music. To me, it feels like it was added in later after the success of what people thought of the trailers, which gave off this really kind of new, interesting vibe for DC. So you can tell that they were thrown in there Guardians of the Galaxy type style, where there's some slow motion shots of the team kind of building from all ends and then walking towards the camera, which I enjoyed a lot of that stuff for this movie because to me they're colorful, and I almost didn't even really feel like they were villains because most of them like have more heart than you've seen Batman or Superman at this point.
Well, very true. You know? Yeah, in this universe, these characters do have more heart. I enjoyed these characters far more than the ones they set up in the last two DC universe movies. I really thought that Margot Robbie was excellent. She fit this role perfectly, was the standout of the film in my opinion. Thought Will Smith was really great in this movie.
I agree with you. Margot Robbie was hands down my favorite part of the movie. I thought she was fantastic as Harley Quinn. It's so cool to see that character in a movie, and she crushed it. And I loved that they chose to go with a different type of costume than she's normally portrayed, because that doesn't work on film. It just doesn't look right.
Which is like the clown outfit kind of costume.
Yeah, the Jester. Yeah, the strong point for me in this movie is watching the team. I thought the dynamic was good, the chemistry was good, and Ayers, yes, this is probably one of his weaker films. He doesn't have a huge filmography of things he's directed so far, but he has a great eye, and this one definitely had studio interference, and because, again, this thing had a lot riding on it because of what we've gotten so far. But I do think that he is an actor's director as well, and he got good performances out of people that have never given good performances before, like Jai Courtney, who had a small part, was just there for jokes, but had this new charisma about him that I've never seen before.
Exactly, yeah. One of the few performances he's put on screen that I really enjoyed that actually stood out for him.
Yeah, and I'm not a fan of Joel Kinnaman. I know he was a last-minute replacement, but he was just as bad in this as most everything else he does.
His normal bland self in this.
Yeah, very bland. Someone I like a lot is Viola Davis, and her character was complex, and it was one of those few characters that did kind of feel like it belonged in Man of Steel and Batman and Superman, because she's kind of like a bureaucrat of some sort.
Her character has that connection. There's certain plot points that come from Batman versus Superman and the Man of Steel film. So I did like that they had that connection for this universe, and her character was that connection. She was really interesting, in my opinion. Some of my favorites in the film, I think.
I think we'll see her in more things, for sure.
Yeah, she's a great character to add to this universe.
My biggest problem with this movie is I just didn't, and you mentioned it already, I just didn't understand the covert op. What were they assembling this team for, and why? What were they going to throw them under the bus for if something went wrong? This plot is it's something the whole world should know about, and there should be coverage of it on the news, but I don't understand what the covert op was or why you needed to assemble these villains.
It feels like they needed to fit in line with what we see in most of these superhero movies now, that the action has to be this bigger, whole city under attack, city under siege kind of setting. Every movie seems to have it. None of them can keep it just small and contained. We kind of like things like Winter Soldier because it felt small and contained. More of these superhero movies, especially this one, should have stuck with the covert operation that these guys are being sent on. It did not need to be saving a whole city. They're not superheroes, they're villains. So it was fine to keep them kind of behind the scenes. And that's what I was really hoping for. It could have been a much more gritty film that way. But instead, it just fell in line with what we've seen so many of these films do.
That was my biggest disappointment, was they weren't villains. They were, but they didn't have any moments. Harley Quinn did, but it didn't give you that sense. You see a couple of them as they're being introduced to, get caught by their particular superhero, and stuff like that at the beginning to kind of say, okay, they're villains. But there wasn't a lot to go on as to why they're bad and what they do that's so horrible, so that when they all get together and they're kind of held hostage by this organization, which felt very Escape from New York, by the way.
That was one film that I kind of
This movie almost was Escape from New York.
But part of the reason I felt I was thinking about Escape from New York was because the city was as barren as Escape from New York, which made no sense.
In this one, the fundamental problem with this movie, and it happens in almost every act of the movie around the same time, midway through the first act, midway through the second and the third, is that there's missing scenes, complete missing scenes that don't explain. When it goes into a scene, you don't understand what had happened. Sometimes we were watching it and it was nighttime in one scene, and then it was intercut with another scene that was daytime, and I'm like, well, where? I don't understand why they're choosing that to cross-cut with. It wasn't edited well. I do think that I really enjoyed the first half hour of the introductions of the characters. I was giddy. I was kind of having fun with that. Again, they overuse of music, but if they originally had gone with something a little more bleak, like the other ones, I don't know if it from the starting gate felt as fun as this one.
No, I wanted it to have energy. I was expecting that, especially from some of the marketing or whatever. So I was totally fine with that. I do feel like it still had a similar tone to what they've set up in the DC universe. It's still the color palette of the film, the style of filmmaking that's on display. It really is style over substance at this point, 3 films in my opinion, and I really am just looking for a nice, well-rounded plot from one of these DC Universe films, an adventure that you can really sink your teeth into from the beginning to the end. We haven't quite got that yet.
This one came the closest, in my opinion.
Yeah, I do think so. Hopefully moving forward, I would definitely like to see a sequel to this movie. That's
Me
for
too.
Sure.
Absolutely.
But I think that the whole DC Universe as a whole, the creative teams that are behind it, I thought David Ayers was an interesting part of the ingredients or whatever, a nice part of the mixture that they were going to add. I was excited to see how this was going to turn out, because what Zack Snyder has done has not really excited me. I just feel like they need a big course correct on the DC Universe and the creative teams that are being brought in to make these films.
See, and that's where we differ a little bit, because I do think it slightly begins to course correct, in my opinion, because I think the problem with the first 2 outings was that they were going for something. They wanted to be the opposite of Marvel, dare I say it, but it's the truth. They wanted to be the opposite of that, so just for that fact, they wanted to go dark, and they missed those marks by making something that felt dark and instead making it just joyless and lifeless and depressing and stuff like that. This one, to me, they created that darkness and that dark tone, but it was still fun.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. No, it's not the same as those first 2, as dour as those first 2 outings are. It's definitely more entertaining and more exciting and more upbeat. It's more on a look of the film and a style of the filmmaking, a style of the way the action is shot, style of really the storytelling at this point, that all the films have had this muddled storytelling.
Yes, all three of these films so far, this one included, it's not getting off the hook. The story was shit, pretty much. You know, like, this movie is tipping the scale towards good for me because of the characters, and because the characters have some time to breathe and stuff like that.
A couple characters we haven't mentioned yet that I do want to mention, because there's one that I think was a great standout that I didn't know anything about in this film. I'm sorry, I don't even know the character's name.
Jay Hernandez.
The actor. I forget the actual...
El Diablo.
El Diablo, correct. He was great. He was another he's almost a kind of third or fourth lead in the film, which was really cool. I didn't expect that. His character has some interesting backstory, and one of the characters with the most heart in the film. There's definitely some heart in this film when they're trying to give you the backstory of these characters, but it's surprising because these are all these villains, and we're seeing their heart more than their heartlessness. So I think a film, Suicide Squad, directed by David Ayers, should have come with some real heartlessness and pain.
I completely agree.
That's what I was expecting.
That's what was missing
in some of his other films.
Yes.
But it was PG-13, so again, maybe don't expect too much of that. So the other character that we haven't mentioned yet was an interesting characterization, was the Joker. Jared Leto does some interesting things. He's not in the film all that much, and I do feel like his scenes were some of the ones that had very choppy editing. It's supposed to be kind of to amp up the wild side in these scenes, or his wild side, or the craziness that's going on in these moments that he's involved in. But I think those were some of the really choppy editing moments in the film.
He was kind of this hypnotic kind of take on the Joker, who I liked it because it was very different than all the other ones, and it wasn't really borrowing elements from those, but it was still the Joker. He was still menacing, and he still had his laugh. The Joker's just a fun character.
I think Jared Leto walked that line pretty well.
I agree.
If he was in the film more, it might start to feel like some of that stuff was coming out.
I can't not mention my least favorite thing about this movie, and I'm sure it's going to be many people's least favorite thing, and it's the villain, the Enchantress. Utterly ridiculous, awful mess of CGI, standing up on this staircase looking like Gozer from Ghostbusters. No clue what her motivations are, or what her plans are, or what she's doing. Nothing. It's possibly one of the worst villains of any comic book movie I've ever seen, because it just doesn't make any sense. She has like this brother who appears out of nowhere, yet is probably from a scene that was cut, so we don't know why he just shows up, and then he looks straight out of Big Trouble in Little China. I obviously had more fun with this than you did, but I just can't help feel that something was missing from it as far as scenes that maybe were cut. So for our audience chuggability, because again, this movie, it didn't have the wit that we hoped for, a lot of it, but I do still feel it has some heart to it, and it is a fun watch in my opinion. If anything, there's some bright colors, there's some interesting characters. Action scenes are very standard, nothing really stand out at all, but there's some standout performances, and sometimes that's enough. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and give this one a thirst quencher.
And for my audience chuggability score, I'm going to go with backwash. I don't feel that this is... Well, I think audiences want to see this movie in the theater, so many people are going to go out and check it out for sure. I just didn't feel like it was a movie, in my opinion. It was definitely more montage and music video, and not a strong film. So I don't think it's really worth wasting your time at the theater.
Okay, and for my gulp gauge score, I'm going to give it 6.5 gulps out of 10.
And for my gulp gauge score, I'm going to give it a 4.
Okay, everybody, that was our quick shot review of Suicide Squad. So guys, tell us what you thought of Suicide Squad. What was your favorite part? Who were your favorite bad guys?
And as always, please give us a like, subscribe to our page, check us out on Facebook and Twitter, and come on back and listen to our next review. Thanks a lot. This has been John.
And this has been We Drink Your Cinema.
I drink it up!